all. Today, on behalf of HRF, I welcome you all for today's session, 16 days campaign against gender-based violence. Today, the topic of the session is gendering healthcare. And the today's session is co-organized by Madras School of Social Work, Chennai, the Banyan Academy of Leadership in Mental Health, Chennai, Tata Institute of Social Science, Mumbai, and Bharathidasan University, Tiruchi. Today, the entire session will be moderated by Ms. Tabassum Fatima, a student from Madras School of Social Work. I welcome Tabassum Fatima to overtake the session. Thank you. Over to Tabassum. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Saravanan. That was nice introducing me. Good afternoon, everybody. It takes immense pleasure in introducing today's session, and it is about gendering health. Now, our speakers, Miss Archana Shekhar, is here with us. So let me now introduce you to Archana Shekhar. Now, Archana Shekhar, she began volunteering with different organizations and collectives while studying an undergraduate degree in visual communication at Ethiraj College for Women, Chennai. When she left college, she joined Banyan, an organization that looks at the homelessness and mental health as a shelter coordinator, running one of Chennai's first shelter for homelessness men with psychosocial disabilities. Since then, Archana has been at the author media that does work on corporate accountability and environmental justice, and at IIT Madras as research assistant on two gender and labor projects. Archana continued to volunteer with different organizations while being employed at one, and has worked on issues including disability rights, community health, education, human and political rights, sexuality, labor, media, arts, and culture. Communication has formed the backbone of Archana's activist work, and she has produced videos and documentary films for the causes she has been associated with, dabbled in writing fiction and creative nonfiction, and has also produced stage plays. Archana is a self confessed feminist and media glutton, and for these reasons agreed to write a weekly column on gender and media for the New Indian Express. The column called Gentangle has helped Archana develop a critical media lens since she began writing it in 2016. Archana recently finished a master's degree in gender studies from SOAS, University of London, and currently works as an independent researcher, writer, and feminist rights activist in Chennai. So, Archana ma'am, we welcome you, and I hand over the session now to you, and please take over the session.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, HRF, for inviting me to be part of this session. I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm sorry, my connectivity, I'm having some issues with, so I am unable to come on video, and I will just be making an audio presentation. When Brinda, who first from HRF got in touch with me about today's panel and said that the theme was gendering healthcare, I was thinking about what I should speak about. And Brinda did help me a little bit. So thank you, Brinda, for that. But what I will be spending the next few minutes talking about is not academic studies, is not research papers, is not journal articles. What I am going to be drawing from are my experiences working with health through many organizations that I have had the privilege to be part of, and then looking at how in each one of these settings, health is gendered and often overlooked, and most importantly, erased. So I'll begin first with talking about my experience at the Banyan. Also very glad to note that BAM is one of the co-hosts of this session. So I went into the Banyan as an 18-year-old intern. And the first day that I stepped into the Banyan was at the Banyan's shelter for homeless women. This is in Mogapere in Chennai, and I stepped in there as I'll never forget the date, on April 27th, 2009. And I feel like that day changed my life. Um, I had wanted to go intern at the Banyan, but for me, I had no idea about mental health or mental illness. So the Banyan was the beginning of my learning about these issues. So for 3 years through my undergraduation degree, I volunteered at the Banyan. And as I volunteered at the Banyan and began to visit the many projects of the Banyan, I also sort of uncovered the Banyan's own story of how the Banyan went from responding to one need and then discovering there was another need and beginning a project or a program to respond to that um, uh, another need. So when the project that I first went to was also the Banyan's first project, it was a shelter, immediate urgent response care home for homeless women who were severely mentally ill and had been rescued from the streets. And then I began to volunteer with the Banyan's outpatient program that had been set up as first a follow-up measure for the women that the Banyan was able to reintegrate back with their families or with the communities. But in the outpatient centers, more and more people who are not Banyan clients began to drop in to access services. And these became the Banyan's urban outpatient clinics that were accessed by both men and women with mental health needs. The Banyan also at that point was running a daycare center after recognizing that when there are people with severe mental illnesses at home, it doubles the burden on caregivers, and having to have one person stay at home, which is usually a woman in many cases, means that the family does not make enough income to sustain itself. And that's how the daycare centers were started. When I finished my undergraduation degree and began to work at the Banyan, it was also when the Corporation of Chennai had initiated its homeless shelters program. And the Corporation of Chennai very sort of innovatively had decided that for each shelter that they would open, they would tie up with an organization that had a particular specialty. So for mental health, the Banyan was one of the organizations that the Corporation of Chennai approached. And the Banyan, in wanting to run a shelter for people with mental illness, opted to and suggested to the corporation that they will take over the shelter in Dumingkuppam in Santhum, that the Corporation of Chennai was anyway running as a mental health, and I'm using the word here in quotes, asylum for severely mentally ill men. So that was the Banyan's first project for residential project for men as well. And being part of that project and working on that project meant a great deal to me. But in the process of working on that project, I think there were many things that we were able to pick up, that we were constantly sort of discussing among peers and among ourselves and the volunteers of the Banyan. One thing that immediately struck us was, of course, how different it is to look at mental health for women and men. And in this case, I am talking about women, people from low income backgrounds, lower rungs of the socioeconomic ladder, and why it was so different. So in the case of the male shelter, what we did notice was that lots of men that came to the shelter, and this shelter was a multi-fold shelter. So it was a long-term care home for men with severe mental illnesses. It was a shelter in which men could walk in just to access food. So we were running a night soup kitchen from the shelter. This was a place that people could just come spend the night in if they were working men in the city. And this could also be a place that they just came to access any other kind of service in. So in this multifold shelter, we realized that many of the men that we were seeing were people who had migrated to the city and had come here in search of jobs. And being on the streets and being lonely and alone on the streets for certain amounts of time was sort of maybe the beginning of mental health issues. And this, in many cases, we thought that time was starkly different from the ways in which we were noticing women's experiences at the Banyan, where lots of women at Adekalam had been rescued and brought to the Banyan severely mentally ill. And in this case, what I really want to say here is that in the case of a woman's pathway to homelessness, it seems, and in many cases, it does point to the fact that women become mentally ill, and then the mental illness takes severe forms. Women wander away from their homes and then end up on the streets. And in the men, we were seeing something that was different, which is that men are men leave homes in search of jobs. Men migrate to larger cities where they know nobody and have nobody to help, and then have to live on the streets and fend with almost nothing for long periods of time. They may or may not be able a job, or that job may or may not be a consistent long-term job. The job may not pay them well enough for them to send money back home. They may lose touch with family because means of communications are expensive and they are unable to communicate with their families. And extended periods of time spent on the streets could make men mentally ill. So we were seeing this different pathway to homelessness or different pathway to mental illness in men. And that at that point, we thought was different. And this again points back to one very gendered aspect of this, the ways in which we look at mental health, which is that in the case of women, it is often never spoken about. Women are controlled, we keep them curbed, we keep them mum, and we don't talk about this illness, fearing the stigma. But also women, even though they know they're under immense pressure, that they're under immense stress, often don't have either the access to resources or the access to healthcare. And by the time they do, they may have wandered away from their homes and ended up on the streets. So in this pathway to homelessness or mental illness, there was definitely a gender difference. Another thing that a campaign that I was involved in when I was working at the Banyan was a campaign called Kind People, Happy City. And in this campaign, what we were trying to do was to reach out people on streets on an everyday basis. So what we did was what we called street engagement, in which every night a bunch of volunteers would take to the streets of Chennai, and on the streets see and begin to have conversations with people who are living on the streets. This was to sort of try and have a rights-based approach to homelessness, but also a care-based approach to the mental health dialogue, which is to say that if we were to first see and make visible the lives that people were living on the streets, and then go on to build a relationship with them. And we used food and one hot meal a day as a means to build a relationship with those that were living on the streets. The idea was that having a relationship, having a friendship, as much as it may seem difficult across class boundaries, was in some ways possible. And more than anything else, it meant that if one person was not in that particular spot on the street on a given day, there was at least one person wondering where that person was. And we did see a significant difference that Kind People Happy City made in making people feel safe about living on the streets. And the feeling of safety meant that these men were mm, trusting in their friendships, knew that this relationship was there and it could be something they could trust. But it also meant that men who were on the streets on the brink of mental illness were having new friendships, new bonds, a sense of security, and probably will not become severely mentally ill. So while we always, and I'd like to call it almost like an experiment with kindness. So if we encountered or met a new man on the streets, if that man spoke to us well, and was able to interact, we would we would, from a rights point of view, say this man has a right to stay on the streets and this man cannot be forced into an institution. So we will try and engage with this man every day at dinner time. So with men, we were able to, may I put this as, we were able to not think twice about letting men stay on the streets and using men staying on the streets to also have a conversation about a rights-based approach to both mental health and homelessness, but also to ask larger questions about the city, the kindness that exists in the city, and what larger systems of urban planning and design could mean to homeless men. But you see, in the case of a homeless woman, whether the woman is on the brink of mental illness, is afraid to be on the streets, or severely mentally ill, we could never take a chance with this everyday engagement or kindness, because a woman on the streets is the most vulnerable there could be. And a woman's body is essentially a site of violence, and we wouldn't dare leave a woman on the street thinking she may be there the next day, and we to engage with her. Because if every woman is always afraid and on the run, a woman with mental illness who's living on the streets must be the worst off. And in that case, we would never dare to leave women on the streets. So in the case of Kind People Happy City, my takeaway was that we certainly need to build a safer city, a kinder city, and a kinder world. But till we do that, women may not be the user survivors at the forefront of this dialogue, because it's almost impossible for a woman to stay on the streets by herself and think of it as a rights dialogue. So with that, I will stop with my experience with the Banyan and with mental health. And now I will move on to working on environmental justice issues and with pollution impacted communities. It was around the same time that I went to the Banyan that I also paid a visit to Kodingiyur, which is Chennai's largest dump yard, landfill. And many of us aspire or dream of waking up to beautiful sea views and sceneries and lots of trees. But these communities, ironically named Panakara Nagar and such in Kodingiyur, wake up to mountains and mountains and mountains of garbage produced by the rest of the city that has ended up in their backyard. And while this may be seen first as an environmental issue, as an issue of caste, as an issue of class, about who produces this garbage and who has to live with question of caste, because in which areas do we aspire to keep our city clean, and in which areas of the city where who lives, and I think who lives where becomes an important consideration in asking where does a landfill go in a city when we are planning a city. So while at that point I was struggling to understand garbage through the lens of class and caste, I think it became immediately or very soon enough evident that we were dealing in a sense with also a gendered issue with respect to garbage, because in these cases of environmental injustice and pollution, it is very clearly women and other sexual minorities that have to deal with the everyday brunt of the pollution that is caused, because a landfill near your home means that your air is polluted, your water is polluted, children are falling ill very often, so elderly need to go to the hospital more often, and the woman's burden of care work increases multifold because there are many more people to be taking care of. And then when we're talking about the social reproduction burden, the thing that all the things that the woman in the family needs to do to keep the family going, we are also realizing that to get clean water, the woman has to go much further away. To get clean food, the woman has to go much further away. Take any other pollution impacted community for example. So if this is near a river, or say Ennur in North Chennai in Tamil Nadu, where we are talking about the polluted river and fish that is hard to sell in that area. Women who are largely the people who sell the fish have to go much larger distances to sell the fish to make the money for their family. And constantly we see, whether it's in the case of corporate greed, as in the case of Bhopal or in Kodaikanal, where corporations and their greed for profit ended up polluting and leaving communities with long-term health effects, and many children with congenital diseases and chronic illnesses and disabilities. We are constantly seeing that women actually bear the largest brunt of environmental pollution and degradation, because their social reproduction burden increases, their household care burden increases, and theirs are the illnesses that go unrecognized and unnoticed. So in the case of, say, a polluted river, a fisherman that needs to go to the sea or to the river to fish comes back with what we see as physical manifestations of pollution on his body. It could be rashes, it could be boils, it could be many things that manifest in many ways physically. But in the woman's case, rather differently, but not surprisingly, it's that the ways in which the mental stress and the load of bearing or having the family's burden on her shoulder that causes chronic pain and chronic fatigue. So, and in these cases of environmental pollution, degradation, and corporate injustice, I think, again, the question that we are asking is the question of intersectionality, and the question of, I think, the very important questions of even when we're saying women are affected, I think we want to ask which women are affected, what kind of women are affected, and whether these women will ever have access to adequate health care, how the health system will see these women, because many of these problems associated with environment health are often reduced to physical problems and not as problems of environmental health. Also, of which kinds of communities, especially caste affected communities, have to live with the brunt of somebody else's environmental pollution and with the fallout of corporate greed. So I think there again we are posing the question of who are these people who are affected, why are these people affected, and even if it's women, who these women are, because all women are not, and all sexual minorities are not affected in the same ways. And here I am just pointing out also to, considering it's the rainy season and every year since 2015 we've been worried about flooding, the ways in which resettlement colonies work, the ways in which the urban poor are displaced from one part of the city to another part of the city, often citing flood prone areas as a danger to their lives, but mainly and in most cases being resettled to very, very low lying areas which are terribly flood prone. And the ways in which these women who are resettled and go to resettlement colonies find it very difficult to find jobs, and have to commute very long distances to their former jobs and their former areas of work, families going, and the stigma that surrounds the resettlement colonies and the ways in which it affects people's attitudes towards employing people from resettlement colonies. So all of this again becomes the woman's burden to bear, because of the ways in which the state especially is thinking about healthcare and thinking about creating cities and creating world-class cities that don't take into account, when I'm saying public welfare institutions, I am also including healthcare, but I'm also saying we need to design a city, or we need to design spaces, and then we need to rework and rewire people to be able to recognize people's different needs towards healthcare. And that I hope will sort of allow us to have a larger discussion about environmental pollution and corporate accountability. I'll take the last 5 minutes I have just to touch upon sexual and reproductive health and rights. But in that case, I think the work that I've been doing most is now during the lockdown period. And I won't go into too much detail on the matter, but the work that I have been doing involves supplying, stocking up first, and then giving away emergency contraceptive pills to women who need them. Emergency contraceptive pills are essentially pills that are taken within 72 hours. Though they I got a message saying you can't hear me. Okay, great. Thank you, Satishri. So are not available in pharmacies as they must be. But they're not available simply because of the confusion between so many different players in this particular field. And that is quite, it's making many of us angry. But I think personally for me, what I would like to see, or how I would like to frame this conversation, is that emergency contraception from the state point of view is often seen as part of the family planning package. So there, I think we post a question of, when we are talking sexual and reproductive health and rights, when are we and how are we going to go beyond thinking about it as family planning, about the need to have a child or the need to not have a child, and think about it from a feminist point. Hear me. Can you hear me now? Not at all.
Yes, uh, yes, ma'am.
You can hear me now?
No, no, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'll wrap up in 2 minutes. I just wanted to point out to the fact that when we talk about matters of sexual and reproductive health and rights, it's often, even in a state that's taken some very progressive measures, like Tamil Nadu, it's often issue. As soon as we bring in the word about it from a feminist point of view, it's always placed as an urban elite issue. And that sort of barrier and that sort of framing of this dialogue needs to be broken if we need to move forward to think about reproductive rights and care and justice for many, many different kinds of people, especially in a country where we are still struggling to speak about abortions, where many people are unable to access safe abortions, where we don't talk about STIs because of the stigma, but because we don't know how to recognize the symptoms, where we frame the as a community, when we talk about it as a community with respect to healthcare only when it comes to STIs and STDs. These are all things that we need to change. But how are we going to change these things? Only if we were to take a feminist healthcare policy as a debate forward that includes all kinds of us and doesn't leave anybody behind. But for that to first recognize that sexual and reproductive health and rights is not a pocket issue for a specific bunch of people who are too privileged and therefore can talk about it, but as the most basic, most essential of the things that we expect the state to and to hand over to us as a welfare state should, and have no questions asked about whether people need this or not, but to recognize this as essential, not only from a family planning point of view, but from a women's rights and agency point of view. And of course, when we are talking about gendered healthcare, there are so many different things that we should in conversation touch upon, including the fact that we still have most women in India who don't get enough nutrition and are anemic, but also to recognize that the home is the first site of discrimination, beginning with the unwanted girl child and then going on to and prioritizing not the girl child with respect to food, with respect to education, with respect to resources. And in that sense, reinforcing gender norms in the mind of the girl child, which is the person who grows up to become the person that does not prioritize her own needs and puts everybody else's needs over her own pain, and takes the longest about it and to address the issue, by which time it's often too late for many of us. So I think I want to leave us here with all of these questions of how do we seek help and who can seek help. But in the same time, how are we having these conversations? Who gets to have these conversations? And we, when talk about mental health and environmental health, need to think about, when we are having these conversations, how to include those that are most affected by these conversations, and how to frame policy and design worlds in which we take everybody along with us. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am Archana. Now, it was an immense pleasure hearing you. And now it's time for me to summarize what madam has spoken to us. Now, it was quite interesting that how she actually differentiated what the male and female, how basically they both get into some mental illness. Now, if you see men, they come in search of work, and they have to stay away from their homes for a longer time, and they face a lot of issues. They have to stay on streets, and this makes them more vulnerable towards mental health. And coming to women, women face a lot of stress at home, and due to some kind of um, unavoidable situations where they are really stressed out, they decide to leave the house, and they just go away from the house, which makes them stay alone. And generally what happens if women are away from their house, it is a huge problem. So that's how men and women, they leave their houses, and the different the difference between how they get into mental illness. Now something interesting what ma'am spoke was the kind people happy city. Now, this was a campaign by Banyan, which actually helped a lot of people who were at the urge of getting affected. So these people had the volunteers who would go to them, talk to them, be friendly with them, so that they kind of feel that there is some kind of connectivity with others, and they are not alone, and they need not get into the mental illness as such. That's a wonderful point we had. And then we then moved to our environmental issues and the corporate some areas, which is where we go and dump all the garbage. So this makes the clear distinguish that the caste and class exist to the peak. And how the top class and the higher caste people, they drop all the wastes and all the garbage in the lower caste and the lower class people's area where they actually habited, where they stay. So that's one thing. And these kind of problems, women who stay in such areas, they face a lot of issues because of this, because the burden and stress level is more on them to take care of the hygiene and health of the people, of the family. So which this creates a lot of problem to them. And we also madam also spoke about resettlement colony. So when people move to some other area because of some kind of situation, so these people have the people in the other side have a stigma towards giving them jobs. So these problems also affect women and their mental health to the core. Now, madam also spoke about sexual and reproductive health. So now, due to the COVID situation, we have the team doing emergency contraception pills. So we also had her speaking about the need of family planning, and how we must think in a feminist point of view. And the girl children, they are not prioritized. And how a girl who is not given her needs as priority, how will she face future? And in that sense, madam had left us with the final note saying who will help us, and what would be the turning point, and how we would have communication on this in further. So thank you, madam. It was immense pleasure in hearing your views on this. So we now have our next speaker of the day. We have Satyashree Goswami. Satyashree Goswami, she believes in social justice and equity, and now let me introduce her to you before moving on. Um, yeah. So, and she has been working for the last 25 years towards a just and equitable society. She has worked with CRY, Child Rights in You, in the recent past. She worked from April 2013 to March 2018 as the director of two programs at the National Foundation for India in New Delhi. Her responsibilities entail working through multi-stakeholder approach with engagement of legislature in two states of India. She also works through grant making towards supporting and facilitating innovations on reproductive and sexual health intervention among young people in 6 states of India. She has been working in the field of sexuality both as an implementer and a trainer for the past 11 years. We welcome you. I hand over the session to you to give your views on the topic gender health care. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabassum. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Okay. Um, uh, so I will speak about my current PhD and the contextualize this discussion around that. I'm doing my PhD where we are looking at chronic body pain in women and how this body pain might be associated. We're exploring how it might be associated with psychological trauma. So, around women's health, the focus so far, if you see in India, has been on reproductive sexual health mostly and maternal health. And it just reduces a woman to being a reproductive being and a mother. Interestingly enough, this also is something that is controlled by the state. So, a woman's reproductive body or a reproductive being that the woman is controlled greatly by the state, because the public health system is filled with programs that are supported by the World Bank or supported by other international bodies, and much of this money comes for women's reproductive, maternal, and sexual health. So when we did want to study women's health in general, unfortunately, we have not been able to get much information on women's health, other aspects of health, which could be anything from a toe pain to headache to, kidney failure or things like that. So the idea of doing this study was also to see invisible disease. So it's not always about a woman who has gone in labor pain and has been refused by the public health system, or a woman who is, a new mother or has just delivered. And it's not just about that, but it's also about invisibility of a woman's entire health condition and well-being is what we are trying to understand through the study. So while it's quite interesting that the literature that we have for India around women's pain shows us literature on rheumatic pain, which is often diagnosed and often seen as pain that is medically has a name. However, there are diseases that the public health, if there is anyone here from public health sector will know, are called idiopathic diseases. And this pain, body pain, which women experience or even men experience, are called idiopathic pain. So I have myself had this pain since I was 14 years old. where all your muscles become tender, your joints pain, and the pain then moves from one part of the body to the other. So if someone asks you, where is the pain now? It might be in your arms, but it might move into, some other part of your body. So this pain now, I don't know whether to say fortunately or unfortunately, has a name, and it's called fibromyalgia. And fibromyalgia basically indicates something to do with muscles and the pain associated with it. But during my research of the last 1.5, 2 years that I've started my field work, I'm talking to Dalit agricultural laborers, Dalit women who are even leaders in their own rights, or even women who are, maybe from upper caste and upper class. So the pain is common to everyone. But interestingly, the shame associated around this pain, that I have this constant pain in my body, is also very, very common for, it's across, caste and class for women. Um, when I started taking treatment for this, which is about 8 years ago, with a pain management expert in Delhi, what I realized is that when women come with someone else, which is normally a male, she's also belittled in this clinic, and this is a high end clinic in middle of posh Delhi, where if she's asked where is your pain, the male generally tends to answer that, oh, she has pain everywhere in her body. And then it kind of gets minimized, or it gets belittled in a manner that she would not have, it's very indignifying in a way to say. So we are also trying to understand whether this is associated, or it has sprung from any psychosocial distress or trauma that the woman has gone through. And we realize that the woman, uh, you know, many of them are even unable to point that out, which I can understand. But many of them are even ashamed to say that there might have been a childhood sexual abuse. There might have been some other form of trauma. For instance, in my case, I did have very strong, sexual assault when I was a young person, when I was around 13, 14 years of age. And I also had a very neglected, adolescence, where I was abandoned in a way by my family. And the blame of the entire sexual assault was put back on me. And I can relate my body pain back to some of those incidences, and see that how suddenly there was a lot of weight I put on. From 35 kilos in 6 months, I became 55 kilos, and I was all of 13 and a half or 14 years old. And this weight stayed on with me, and the pain began with, the weight coming in, and all these other instances happened simultaneously. However, why I'm trying to say this is that a lot of women are unable to relate these kind of trauma. So there is trauma, there is pain. The relationship is not yet established. There are people who talk about their trauma. There are people who do not talk about their trauma, but they do talk about their body pain and the shame associated around this pain. So, if we look at our society in South Asia, or also in other parts of the world, especially the lesser developed parts of the world, a woman's labor that she gives of giving care, reproducing, and looking after the household, so the social and reproductive labor, is unpaid and is never even recognized that needs to be paid. Therefore, what happens is that if one recognizes that a woman is unwell, which also means that that much of relaxation the woman would have to be given not to do that labor, which could be, cooking, which could be cleaning, which could be, going to the fields to do weeding and getting that day's wages, or even supervising a household in case of upper caste woman maybe. So this entire concept of not giving recognition to a woman's pain in this case, or a woman's overall well-being, is because that then the society would have to look at how this is affecting. If there is a recognition to that, that would then have to mean that a woman is also getting a holiday for for not being well. But that the society is not yet ready, or patriarchy or the patriarchal structures have ensured, which has crept into the public health system, where just reproductive sexual health or reproductive maternal health is what is given focus on. I'm not saying that that should not be the focus. Still, the number of deaths, maternal deaths or deaths due to any of these reproductive complications is very high in India or in South Asia. I'm not saying that should not be given importance, but what happens to a woman when she ages? What happens to a woman who is in perimenopausal state or a menopausal state? What happens to her body? So I'm doing the study for women who are above 35, so who are, whose reproductive life, so to say, is waning, and they're going towards perimenopause. It's very interesting to see that these women do not fit anywhere within the public health sector or the public health even narratives of this country. The second thing is that a woman's life and a woman's story is never considered a part of the narration. So in our public health system, also in semi-public or private health systems, where is the time for a doctor to hear the story of a patient? So there is a new form of medical practice that is starting across the world, which is called narrative medicine. And this narrative medicine says that it is important to listen to a person and listen to her whole story. So I think through this, research that I'm doing, and also my interaction with women, tribal women, or scheduled caste women in Assam and Dalit women in Karnataka. I think along with that, a lot of other women who are working, financially independent, have taken even decisions like where they want to be, single mothers and things like that. Across everyone, they do not find themselves with their well-being within the public health system. And I'm hoping that after the research is completed, and once we talk to more and more people, more and more women, not people, more and more women, we would be able to understand how women's overall health and well-being needs to be taken into account, not just within the sphere of reproductive maternal health, but overall health. I think I'd also like to bring to notice here what happens to people who are considered, sexual minorities, as we say, or people with alternate sexualities. What happens to, female to male, people who have transitioned from female to male, transitioned from male to female, and especially for those who have transitioned from male to female? If they go through the entire SRS procedure, they already go through a painful process. Apart from that, their overall well-being, health and well-being, is also nowhere to be found within the policy framework or the public health framework. So I think when we talk of gendered health, we need to look at health from this perspective. I must add that men also suffer from body pain. And although there is more recognition of that, because they can, claim, how do I say, they can claim to take rest, or the workload is not so much on them in terms of reproductive and social labor that they don't give that kind of labor compared to women. And this is research data across the world. So men's pain can still be recognized somewhere. But when it comes, I'm not saying therefore that when we take a gendered lens, we should overlook that. We should not overlook the some of these silent diseases which are more prominent in women. Research data says that women suffer from more pain, but interestingly, they don't put it as body pain. They say, okay, more neck pain, more head pain, more, things like that. So yeah, I'd like to end here by saying that as activists, as practitioners, as researchers, I think we need to look at health of women, of girls, of old women as well, from a more from a larger or broader perspective and broader picture, rather than just looking at reproductive maternal health. And yeah, and also to recognize that women's unpaid labor, social and reproductive labor, needs to be, acknowledged, and if possible, paid. Women need to be paid for that. Thank you. Thank you, Basu.
Um, Thanks, ma'am. It was nice to get your views on gendering healthcare. So, Madam Satyashri has spoken to us about chronic body pain and psychological trauma, which is where she also mentioned about pain and shame. So, the how women their pain is neglected, how the peers, they don't recognize the women's pain. So these things madam had discussed with us. And one interesting topic what madam has discussed with us is about the narrative medicine, which means when you are heard, you are relieved. So you want somebody to listen to you, where you feel all right, now I have almost told everything and I'm vented out and I'm like really relieved a bit. So these things madam had actually spoken to us. And now how are there's a term what madam has used, fibromyalgia, which means a body pain which can probably today you might have in your leg, tomorrow it might move to some other part of your body. So and these things it's kind of little enlightening that such things exist and we are still unaware of all these things. So it was nice to hear from you, ma'am. And also about madam has mentioned about the sexual minorities, where the male when they go for trans into women or women to men. So these these procedures, this itself is really painful. So we have to probably get more details of all these things, and we have to keep ourselves aware of all that, so that we as humans start thinking of others and their pain. So and with this I would like to thank madam for such a nice session. And our another speaker will shortly join us, so we are waiting for ma'am. Yeah. So once the speaker comes in, we'll get into talking about her, if any. So madam has shared her mail id, so if anybody wants to talk to her about pain and such things, madam has mentioned her mail id. You, any one of you, can get in touch with her if required. Yes. So we'll wait for next 2 minutes. Now she's gonna get connected soon. The participants can come up with questions if they have, so that we can keep moving towards that. Well, if anyone is there, we can take up the questions. They can write their questions on the chat box, or they can unmute themselves if you have questions. All right. If nobody has, then I have a question, ma'am. So here we spoke about narrative medicine. Could you just give us more input on that, and how it actually helps people, get little relaxed? If you could just give us more points on that.
Yeah, so narrative medicine is a new form of medicine that is starting and across the world, and the practice has started only in parts of Europe and America. But see, the basic idea is that to listen. Like you also, when you summarized, you have said that listening to a condition is almost healing. I'm also a trained psychotherapist. So when we see our clients, we know that many of them only want someone to listen with a non judgmental, empathetic perspective. So often, what happens, I think I don't know if I mentioned, but I'd like to mention here that women minimize their own pain. Yeah, women minimize their own well-being, because I think Archana was saying earlier that you're conditioned even as a child to look after others rather than yourself. This entire glorification of motherhood or mamata is nothing but, it's like a trap where you don't run away from children. Who will look after them if you and I run away, from our own children? So this whole conditioning that has happened, that others lives first and my life later, whether I'm a mother or whether I'm a woman, is what is leading to problems of women's life. That's why you see there are more destitute women. One is that there is no financial control, or they do not have financial resources with them, uh, because they're not educated, they don't work, or even if they work. I mean, I have one person who has spoken to me about her pain. She's completely well qualified, but there was a condition put to her marriage that after her marriage, she cannot do any work outside her home. And then she went into this marriage and soon realized that her mother in law had a lot of issues, psychiatric issues, when she sees a couple together. So when she saw this girl and her husband together, she started throwing tantrums. Now, this girl was completely confused as to what to do and started getting pain one after the other, the knees, the arms, shoulders and things like that. And now she has come to such a state where she doesn't know what to do, because even after, she has, I think, a 20-year-old child, her husband or a son wouldn't do any work for her, even if she has come back with very heavy steroid injections. And if you ask her why she is not trained her son, she is almost, speechless about it. So in narrating to me, even when I'm collecting these narratives of women, there is the sense of new revelation sometimes that they get, that okay, I'm not so helpless. you know while there are some who are not telling their stories, some are telling their stories. So narrative medicine, essentially, there is also something which Engels had given us about the biopsychosocial model of medicine, which means that a disease is not just biological. any disease is not just biological. It also has a psychological side to it, and there is a social side to it. So, yeah, I think that's where I would like to end. That narrative medicine is very new, but it's beginning to get more and more, uh, recognition. I have some questions, I think, here. Uh, how we can teach children of young age for the people as they grow, they would be a brand new future generation devoid of gendering in healthcare. Can we have insights from both guest speakers? Archana, would you like to also take this question? She is here. Okay, so I think one answer to this question is that respecting women has to be taught right from the beginning. And how do we respect women? It starts from our own homes. How much are um, how much are we as women demanding that respect? So women, young girls being educated and also seeking financial independence. That's what I was saying, the recognition of a woman's social and reproductive labor is very important. Just because there is no money in a woman's hand doesn't mean she's not contributing to the household. So the moment we start demanding for this recognition, monetizing this contribution of the woman, it automatically comes to a place where we are saying we need to respect a woman because she's contributing at times maybe much more than a man. So I would say that the contribution of women and contribution of men both together needs to be looked at, and the respect has to start somewhere right from the beginning for children. Yeah, I would end there. Maybe Archana, you would like to take it.
Not much to add to what you've said, ma'am, but there I completely agree with you. I think somewhere, and ironically, the onus again is on their daughters are being brought up the ways in which their sons are. And so from the very beginning to think about equality, but also to break gender norms. One short story or a piece that I read on Facebook comes to my mind now, where a mother had tried to bring up her daughter to be brave and bold and strong and independent financially and otherwise. And then when both her children were adults, she was asked to come to the police station, and she thought something had happened to her daughter. But it turns out that her son had physically assaulted his wife, which is this woman's daughter-in-law. And then she says, I brought up my daughter like I would people would have asked me to bring up a son, but I forgot to bring up my son with the sensitivities that he should have been taught. So I just wanted to say that here, and say that somewhere the onus is on women as mothers to do this maybe differently. But while we're doing it differently, we shouldn't forget that what we are trying to do is to not just talk to our girls, but also talk to our sons.
Well, all right. Our third speaker of the day, Ms. Geeta Menon, has joined us. And now let me introduce her, and then we'll move on with her session. Now, Ms. Geeta Menon, she has co-founded Sri Jagruti Samiti in the early 80s. Ever since, as a women's rights activist, the voice of the toiling and marginalized women she has always worked for, also for the identity and dignity of domestic workers. Now, she has won tremendous awards. Now, the awards, I'll just read it out now for you all. Citizen Individual Award of the Year from Namma Bangalore Foundation 2016. And then she has won Nirbhaya Award in 2018 from Nirbhaya Mothers Ashta Devi 2018. Hero of Mirror 20. So award Christ University 2016. Honored to have you here. Hello.
Hello? Hello?
Hello. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, Fatima? I mean, Tabassum? Connection is bad.
Hello.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, ma'am. Now I hand over the session to you. Yes, I can hear you very well.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So I hand over the session to you. Please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Actually, this is a bit of a jam point here because we just finished a women's young domestic workers meeting. And in fact, in the meeting came out
Okay.
wonderful assertions about our identity as women. Very often when we workers, when we are a domestic workers rights union also, and as Sri Jagriti Samati, we've been working with there's thousands of workers in the who stay in the slums. I'm not here to lecture anything, but I would just like to raise some points for discussion, which I feel are very important and sometimes left out of when we say women and violence. Thank you, HRF, for inviting me, first of all. And while talking about violence itself, we are all seeing how it is so endemic in the system. It is so much internalized into the system, and not only in the system, also into our own lives, into our own psyche. And this violence has been so internalized that many of us have come to believe that that is the way of life. I mean, there's no other way of behaving or thinking. And many times this violence is generated or built up because of the models we have, or the models we see, or the images that are built up in society at large. What I would like to share here basically is that when we talk about gender based violence, it is not just to talk about a violence that is, like, say, gender based. That gender based word includes the violence that is there by the intersectional forces that are there, the intersectional elements that are there, that of class, caste, and gender. And today it is also, we'll have to talk of, when we talk of gender, we should not forget the third, the other, the third gender. That is the transgenders and others, LGBTQ community. So we should be very clear when we are talking. I mean, I don't think it can be called just gender based violence. It is just violence in all kinds, in all forms. And this violence has been seen through not just obviously violent incidents, which we are seeing again and again in society. They called after every gang rape that takes place, after every, like in Athras and like in the many other gang rape cases, which have happened mainly on Dalit women, we are seeing that the violence continues. It's not just the violence of rape, but it is also the violence of the stigma that continues, or the re-victimization of the victim that continues. And for that, not just the rapists are responsible, also the government machinery is responsible, and the way the judiciary functions, the way the state functions. You see, very often, this is what we were discussing with our women also. Very often, when we talk about man woman issues, or we talk about women issues, or we talk about gender, we generally talk about patriarchy as a superstructure. And we forget that between patriarchy and the women or the men is also, there is a state in the picture. So very often the state is composed of the police, the legal machinery, the judiciary, and even the media. So if we see these elements of the state that go to make up the notion of control over women, that go to make up the notion of giving justice to women or looking after justice, that give this notion that they are looking after justice, we have to understand that they are also part and parcel of this civilization, which is largely a caste based civilization. And when they say a caste based civilization, I mean that not just whether it's Brahmin or Dalit or Kshatriya or whatever, it's not just the physical form of the caste, but it is also the notions of caste that are built up into all of us. We all have internalized it. For example, the notion of high and low, the notion of the mental and physical division of labor, and purity and pollution. And how does this violence get stabilized or get internalized or get totally have its footing is because of this notion of caste that is internalized by all of us. It gives us to believe that we are born into this caste and we are born into this kind of discrimination, so we have to put up with it. There's no other way. We cannot break out of it. And this is reinforced again and again by the way the state behaves if anyone tries to do something different. Take, for example, the many intercaste marriages. We have dealt with many intercaste marriages that have taken place, inter-community marriages that have taken place, and where the obstacle is the notion of caste, is the notion of religion. A follow-up of that has been how the state has still made it more, still reinforced it and institutionalized it, is by this recent what is happening in the name of love jihad, where this love jihad, the jihad word itself is taken on taken on to mean a certain context, a religious context, but actually it is more to communalize the whole issue. And to support all this, we have the state assemblies and the government passing laws now. Karnataka is not far behind. They are also in this game of institutionalizing violence, of institutionalizing the freedoms, the non-freedoms that are there for youngsters and for adults, especially belonging to certain communities, whether it be with the certain communities, the minorities, belonging to the women sector, belonging to the unorganized sector, or belonging to the like LGBT community. So we have this clear systemic pattern that is there, that has been there because the notions of caste, that is the notion of purity and pollution, the notion of high and low, that of mental and physical division of labor, are all being reinforced in order to keep us in fear. And this is just exactly what we were discussing among the people, because when most of the time, when you see the incidents happening and the reactions of women, or the reasons why girls do not take the risks, or the reasons why when they are abused, or when they are being raped, or when there's assault on them, or when there's sexual harassment, why is it that they don't come out and complain? Is because the entire drama that has been played by the notion of caste and parampara and honor and prestige and community, everything that has been filtered down all these years in order to keep us under fear and under control. And because there is this fear and control persisting, the right to make a choice, the right to say no, the right to make a choice, the right to take a decision, itself, all these rights are just being assaulted, are just being attacked. And wherever people have tried to break that, wherever people have tried to cross the Lakshman Rekha, there has been a continuous assault on the woman and the women's families. So therefore, it is not just discrimination issue, neither is it just an individual issue or an individual front lines drawn. It is also a very, very systematically driven issue, because the caste and religious identities have to be kept intact, or else the social fabric will break down and something else may take over. There is the famous story of Akbar and Birbal. There is the story of Eklavya. There are all these stories which talk about how if you allow the, say, the women or the Dalits or the minorities or the other communities, if you allow them freedoms, if you allow them a little education, if you allow them scope to cross certain borders and boundaries, then they will take over the world. Then they will take over the world, and therefore this must be stopped. How can it happen? Because the hierarchy of control, the hierarchy of oppression will then change, and that is most dangerous for those who want to rule us. That is one. Second is that the entire pattern from about 3 decades, the entire pattern has been driving the political forces to be in control, and the political forces that are supporting the corporates, that are supporting that are being supported by the corporates, and that want to continue it as one notion rule. The one notion rule, that of one nation, one language, one language, one one identity, one, everything is one. Everything should be as robotic and as controlled as they want it to be. And this is the pattern that is emerging. So privatization has happened. Farm laws are now being introduced, whereby everything is being guided and monitored by those who want to have control over this country. So women are the most easily susceptible to this control, because we all know that once women make up their minds, and once women are given the opportunity to tackle these challenges, once women start imbibing the fact that they can say no, and they do not, and their consent is important, and that they need to, and that they are able to not only guide the society along, but they are able to also give justice and give values of justice and equality in this society. That is the reason why there is a constant assault on women, and constantly there has to be violence issues brought about. Because the minute you don't do that, therefore diversion is taking place, diversion from real issues, what majority of our women are going through. Issues of discrimination, issues of housing, issues of water, issues of sanitation, issues of hunger. Keep them malnourished, keep them without any rights, keep them without any space, keep them without any freedoms, and then you have the most slave-like situation. And that is what is needed to be imposed. And that is why it's not just in this 15 days of gender-based violence time that we need to talk about it, but we need to bring this about in every day of our life, in our families, and in our own ways of behaving and thinking. And unless we do that, it will not change. Now, Roshan asked me to talk about the workplace harassment, and that of the garment workers, that of the domestic workers. I mean, we are seeing that the sexual harassment that is there, different forms of sexual harassment, some tied to production, some not tied to production, are taking place. But inadvertently, all this is happening, all this kind of sexual harassment is happening on the basis of the fact that the autonomy of women is not in their hands, and the control over women has always been rested in not just patriarchy, but also in the superstructure of religion and caste. And unless we understand that, we cannot just get rid of sexual harassment just because we have a law or just because we are strong enough to fight. I mean, if I go to talk about the law and the implications and then the functioning of the local committees and how many cases we have handled, and then the girl is so fed up, finally, the victim or the survivor is so finally fed up because of the way it moves, that she has decided to withdraw a complaint. I mean, this is not one case. There are many cases where the backlash is happening on women. Take Nirbhaya, take Hathras, take all these cases. Instead of giving the courage to more and more women to come out and report and to break their fears and their boundaries, what is happening is a backlash is happening whereby more and more women are saying that, at least among our cases that have come up, many more women are getting back into saying that why should we ever complain when we don't have any framework of protection, we don't have any framework of justice, and we do not know, how to handle it. So I think it's very important to understand that violence happening is, of course, criminal. Violence happening on women and on anyone, on any human being, is criminal, and everyone has their own rights. But at the same time, supporting it by keeping quiet, supporting it by allowing the laws of allowing the wheels of justice to go on, supporting it by not talking out against this, supporting it by allowing the judiciary to get away with everything, is
Geeta ma'am,
equivalent to violence.
Geeta ma'am, it's a gentle reminder that you have 5 minutes left.
Yeah, I don't need 5 minutes. I finished.
All
I
right.
mean, I just wanted to put these few points, and if you all have questions, it's much better to answer than.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll get into the question and answer session shortly. I'll just summarize the beautiful points you had discussed with us. So so if you have anything to add on.
No, you go ahead.
All right. So, ma'am had spoken about the caste system, like how a person is born into caste and how they have to deal with it because they are born into such caste and they cannot move out of it because it is inherited. Now and then it is, and how it is reinforced by state, where the intercaste marriages, interreligious marriages, all these things are somehow restricted and denied. So these things, the caste plays a major role, and how institutionalizing of violence is done by the state. So these are the key points ma'am had spoken, and then ma'am had also spoken about women's or girls, how they do not come up with the sexual assaults or sexual harassment because of the fear of caste, or also the fear that they are denied of the basic needs, and why should they even come out, because the shame of the family, the honor of the family, because of all these things, the stigma which is attached to all these things, that the women, they do not come out with that. um, and it all has to be started from the home. Like if you raise your child in a particular way, which is giving equal opportunity for both the girl and the boy child, giving them equal opportunity to learn, to be safe, to be happy. So all these things matter a lot. If you It all starts from your family. At least for the next generation we can do that much. So ma'am had beautifully taken us to all these things, and she has enlightened us about all these things. So now I would ask the participants to start with the question and answer session. We have a question for Archana ma'am. This is by Veronica. Yeah. Um, Now the question to Archana ma'am is, could you throw some light on men who land up living on streets? What social background they come from, and are they inter or intra-state migrants? Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you for your question, Veronica. Um, about the men who come to large cities looking for jobs and end up homeless and thereby mentally ill. Um, it's all kinds of men, unfortunately. So um, the shelter for men with psychosocial disabilities that the Banyan runs, we have men from across the country. Um, we've engaged with homeless men and sometimes homeless families from within the state of Tamil Nadu who had to stop doing agriculture and move to the city looking for jobs. Um, and surprisingly enough, we've also met a bunch of men who are from Chennai itself. But when I say Chennai, I mean the Greater Chennai Corporation, which they're coming from far off corners to the city, from off the city into the center to work and go back. In fact, one of the first men that I saw one night on the street, and he seemed extremely lost and extremely frightened, was somebody that we talked, and he agreed to come with us to the shelter, was somebody just from the suburbs of Chennai. It took 6 months for him to remember where his family was from, and before we could reintegrate them, right? One of the first cases of sort of urgency that we ever had once we started running this shelter was of a man who spoke Sri Lankan Tamil, um, who was at the beach, and somebody told us about him, and we went spoke to him, but he was at that point um, very shaken and very angry, but also very confused because he suddenly had a complete blank out and didn't know, didn't wasn't able to say anything to us except that he had come to Tamil Nadu for his daughter's wedding. And that day it would have been um, it was a choice we needed to make as to whether we needed to, for whatever reason, though this person was angry and agitated, take him back to the shelter and keep him at the shelter for 3 days, because this was a Friday evening, and the Sri Lankan embassy, would only work or allow us to get in touch on Monday morning. There was no way to reach them over the weekend, or we didn't have a way to. So it was a question of whether we let him be on the streets and figure it out. But this man seemed to be very confused and wandering, or to keep him, to convince him to stay at the shelter and keep him there for 2 days till we were able to reach the Sri Lankan embassy. We did the latter, and on Monday we were able to track the person's family because they'd all come into the city on a visa for the daughter's wedding. So this man had been so stressed out, I think, about the wedding that he had a complete blank out, left the wedding venue for something, didn't know the way back. He was in a new country. And got lost in the city, and it kind of further kept um, spiraling till he found himself in a place where he knew nobody and could remember nothing about the venue, about the place, didn't have a phone, didn't have numbers, nothing. So people come from all kinds of walks of life. One person that we met on the verge of um, death by suicide, and got almost rescued as he was trying to get into the sea, was somebody who'd come from a very, very well-to-do family and had served as the CEO on many companies, and after retirement had made a series of bad investments and had lost everything. And this was a person that was rescued and brought to the shelter as well. So yeah, it's a range of men, and those who do end up on the streets homeless, at least in the case of men, all seem to be doing it from, I mean, a lot of them do it from the economic labor, physical labor place is where they come from.
The participants can unmute themselves while asking the questions. I also have a question for you. Now that you've worked with them for quite few years, so what do you think are the government measures to ensure that the homelessness is reduced?
To be honest with you, I haven't actually worked on mental health in a few years. I'm still associated with the Banyan, but I'm no longer employed there. Mm, but like I mentioned earlier, every time we are talking about healthcare and um, healthcare as a public institution, when we're looking at it in the light of institutionalized violence, I think we need to ensure that every kind of healthcare is devoid of the violence that it perpetuates simply by overlooking and erasing and expecting people to conform. And I think the many reasons that women, girls, and people of gender and sexual minorities are unable to have access to resources or access to healthcare is because they're constantly being told that they don't conform to a particular norm. And unless we break those norms, we can't make access and resources possible. So I think from a state point of view, it's really about um, thinking about healthcare innovatively from a feminist point of view, but also to keep healthcare devoid of all kinds of violence. And there to think about violence, I would say not as the physical, as the bodily harm, as the assault, but as to think of violence as service, as erasure, as acknowledgement, and of understanding and of empathy.
We have a question on chat box. This is a question addressed to our speakers. Women to realize their potential for healthcare. What are the new perspectives required for the betterment? The question is asked by Samreen.
Okay, can I answer that? Hello, can I answer that?
Sure,
Can I
ma'am.
answer that?
Sure, ma'am.
You can take.
Yes?
Sure, ma'am, please go ahead. Go ahead.
There's a lot of disturbance. Okay, I just would like to answer that because actually the topic was about also reproductive, I think, health and the potential. So now there are two ways of looking at this is that when we look at healthcare in general and the system and the systemic way it has operated all along, and when you look at women's the mindset also, when they how they look at themselves and their bodies, and how they look at their health issues and how they look at their family as most important. We have seen along in all our work where we have tried to get health schemes and we have tried to work with health as an issue. I worked with pregnant women during this COVID time, also, the pregnant women cases had come up. And everywhere you see in normal situations of healthcare, women rarely use those healthcare systems because the notion in their head is that my pati before me and my children, as long as the importance or the priority is built around her family, her children, and her husband. And so it is their needs of healthcare that are more important. And as long as she doesn't break that notion that I am also important, that my body is important, that my needs are important, this will not go away. So the maximum use of the healthcare and the medicine, I mean, and the medical needs priority is more given to men or given to their husbands and to their children. Of course, first of all, sometimes it's only to their children and less to their husbands, and then far less to themselves. because they feel, I mean, they have been also treated as being responsible for everything in society. So, no matter what, you have to go on, no matter what, you have to sacrifice, no matter what, you have to give. Okay, this giving nature is that of a woman. With these ideas behind it, they have far less made use of the healthcare systems in this country. Besides that, the healthcare system being what it is, they feel sometimes that we will take care of our own health by using indigenous medicine made at home, or medicines which have been giving them some relief from the time of their mothers and grandmothers. Now, coming to reproductive health, that is a totally different story, because when you go to see this whole idea of becoming a mother, the whole idea of becoming a mother is something that is without a choice sometimes. And it is connected to the whole thing as to what I said before of purity and pollution. And this has to be looked at also in connection with the girl's menstrual cycles. And the minute puberty starts, and the mindset that develops that she's impure, she's to be an untouchable, and her needs are subservient. Her needs are only in the context of her menstrual cycle. Okay. The needs are not separate from that. So, starting from the puberty cycle, starting to the fact that she is now into reproductive health, the norms and the stigma and the ideas associated with menstruation carry on into when she gets married, into the sexual health, into her own sexual health as well as into the factors of decision making. Like we were asking our women today, how many of them can decide that in their own sexual relationship, in their intimate relationship with their husband, how many of them can decide that they want to have a sex or not? So there's no decision power even at that time. Then there are many women who still cannot decide whether they want to have children or not. They cannot decide. It is the relatives that decide, it is the families that decide for them, it is society that decides for them. So there also your decision power is lost. You cannot decide whether you want to have children or not. You have no choice. You cannot decide whether you want to have continue with pregnancy or not. You cannot decide whether, I mean, it's not in your hands. If you have a girl, then you cannot decide anything. If you have a boy child, then you are considered as something in society. And after delivery too, the kind of norms that are followed, you cannot decide on your health. Like when we were interviewing the pregnant women, and we were meeting them and trying to give them rations and things like that during the lockdown also, most of the pregnant women, I mean, I saw cases women coming, a girl who was 19 years old, and she's having a second baby. I mean, so where there was a 15-year-old girl who got married at 12 years, and she's having a first baby by 15. I mean, if this is the case, it's not one or two, it is quite rampant. And if this is the case, then I asked this 19-year-old girl, how did you decide to have a second child, when the first child itself, you're young, your body is still not ready for it, and the second child you're having without a gap? So she says, don't ask me, my in-laws wanted it. Okay, so I said to her, then let the in-laws have it. And her mother-in-law was standing very close by. But like 19-year-old girl, so therefore it's a matter of, do women have their own agency? Do women have their own decision-making powers? Are women ever asked about it? So everything about healthcare is as it is told to them, and they must do what is told to them. So there's no decision that's what we were discussing with the woman today. How many of us can go because we have a choice We are sick. We need to look after ourselves. How many of us can go to the hospital by ourselves? How many of us have the money to go to the hospital? How many of us are told that it is not important now, we'll go tomorrow? But if our husbands are sick, then immediately there's an attention paid to that. So, this potential to use healthcare, the need is there. The need is there to use healthcare, but again, it should match. The need should match the consent given, the choice that is there, and the kind of systemic and the kind of health system that is there in our country. Because when we were doing this mother cards for the pregnant women and we were trying to access the services that are there, there are so many difficulties, especially for migrants. Again, for migrants, it's another whole lot of it's a whole lot of problems because they don't have the required identity cards. I mean, which is very surprising because healthcare should be universal. There should be absolutely no restrictions of, this card, that card, because you need healthcare. That's all. You are pregnant, you need to deliver somewhere in a safe place in a government hospital, but this is all denied to you. So the healthcare potential is there, but to make use of that potential, I mean, there are a lot of cultural also barriers as well as economic as well as political barriers to be overcome.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for letting us know that potential is there, but the denial is also there, and we have to work on it. So we have, just about 5 more minutes. If anybody wants to ask question, we can go for one more question. All right. Well, I have another question, ma'am. Now we have, during the pandemic situation, what is the mental health ratio which you have, seen in the couple of years before, and what is the distinguished difference now you see? So, and in whom is the ratio more, the men or women?
This question is to whom?
To you or Archana ma'am. It is open for you all three.
Okay. See, I would like to answer this because we have been also observing and taking up cases and walking the talk all along. We had a shelter for some time, and we had a shelter where we had domestic worker migrants who were rescued and brought, as well as we had domestic violence victims, now survivors. So when we had the shelter and we were able to see that domestic violence is one part, okay, is a very core issue. But that domestic violence, whether the domestic violence is triggered off a mental health issue, or whether the mental health issue was there, therefore domestic violence has been triggered off, was always a contradictory question. Okay. So we had many cases at that time also where we dealt with mental health, and I can say for sure that it has increased. And I can say for sure during the pandemic too, because we were continuously working with migrants and we were continuously working with domestic violence issues too. Pandemic does not stop all that. Pandemic does not stop domestic violence. Pandemic does not stop rapes. Pandemic does not stop all that. So domestic violence victims, when domestic violence cases, when we were dealing with, I mean, it was much more mentally an issue because now you're caught up inside the house. At least in between, before you could move out, you were moving out for work, you were moving out for socialization. But now, because of the pandemic, you're caught inside the house with the husband you don't like, or the husband who's beating you, or a man whom you don't like, and you have to be 24 hours in that situation of closeness, and you're isolated from everything else. So there were cases, but you really cannot make out like that because they were not able to come out and raise it. but there were definitely cases of mental health issues. In fact, one of the practical issues that were there was, how will a patient who's recovering from a mental health issue like depression, we had a problem of him being traveling to from this place to his own district because of the pandemic and the inter-district travel restrictions. So that was one practical systemic issue. But the mental health cases definitely are bound to increase and have increased. The only thing is our perception of it. Very often we don't look at it as a mental health issue. We just look at it as, this person doesn't understand, or this person is just getting mad for no reason at all. He's an angry person or she's an angry person. So as far as men and women are concerned, and also after the liquor shops opened again, you see, the entire violence that increased after that also led to its own systematic, own issues of what you call fear, own issues of depression, anger, not knowing what is the mechanism that will address all this. Basically, it is that. We have absolutely no mechanisms whereby this can be gone. That's why you see the number of suicides also that have increased among the young. This is because there's absolutely very less redressal systems. And how do you understand it, and how do you address it? Who will address it, and how will it be addressed? Because the outlook is that we want to look at it as an outside problem. It is nothing to do with us. It is nothing to how we have created it. We will look at that person who's suffering from mental health as a not so normal person. We have to understand that it is very normal to have depression. It is very normal to have emotional breakdowns. It is very normal to have some kind of some kind of thought processes which are not matching the normal. So I would say that, the normal has to be, what is normal has to be relooked again.
Right, ma'am. Right, ma'am. You're absolutely right. So now, thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing all your insights on that. Now, we had almost reached to the finish of the session. So now I would like to thank HRF for giving such a beautiful opportunity for me to be a moderator for the session, and just have a talk with such eminent speakers. So I would like to thank them, and I would now like to hand over the session to Saravanan from HRF. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tabasum Fatima. And good evening, everyone. This is once again Saravanan from HRF. On behalf of HRF, I would like to thank all the three speakers for sharing their graceful words with us. It was a wonderful speech. And I would like to thank moderator Tabasum Fatima from MSSW, Madras School of Social Work. And I would like to thank all the participants for joining here. We hope this session would be very useful and informative to all of you. And I would like to thank sign language interpreters as well as translators of this session. And finally, of course, I have to say thank you to all the co-organizers and our team. Before we close the session, I would like to share two announcements with all of you. The first announcement is all the sessions, the entire 16 sessions is being uploaded in our YouTube channel. You can watch the session at any time in our YouTube channel. Our channel name is Human Rights Advocacy and Research Foundation. So I repeat, our channel name is Human Rights Advocacy and Research Foundation. You can see the link of the channel in chat box. We have posted just now. And if any of your friends or colleagues want to watch the session, you can refer our channel. And the second announcement is we have successfully completed 15 sessions of this 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So tomorrow is the last session in the series. And tomorrow we have international speakers from Association for Rural Advancement, the organization located in South Africa. Tomorrow the core speakers will be Ms. Laurel, a director from Association for Rural Advancement, Ms. Amki, a gender field worker, Association for Rural Advancement, and an Indian speaker from, her name is Ms. Sucharita Ishwar, an woman entrepreneur. So on behalf of HRF, I invite you, I invite all of you for tomorrow's session also. So that's all for the day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Welcome, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Welcome, ma'am. Thank you.